I didn't see the sign when I first checked in. If I had, I would have turned around and walked straight back out into the rain without a second thought. But by the time I noticed it, it was already too late. I'd been driving through the Appalachian backroads longer than I planned to. A wrong turn, then another, and suddenly the paved highway turned into a narrow, winding road barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. The forest pressed in close on both sides, tall hardwoods and thick underbrush swallowing whatever light my headlights threw out. It was late, well past midnight, and a cold mist hung low between the trees, blurring everything beyond a few yards. My phone had lost signal miles back, and the radio had dissolved into static. When the motel appeared ahead, it felt less like luck and more like the mountains deciding to let me stop. The building was old. Not charming old, but worn down, forgotten old. 2 stories, peeling paint, and a sagging roofline that looked like it had survived 1 too many winters. A single fluorescent light buzzed outside the office, attracting moths that threw themselves against it over and over. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and the surrounding woods were unnervingly quiet. Inside the office, the air smelled like mildew and damp wood. A woman sat behind the counter, hunched slightly, her gray hair pulled back tight. She didn't smile when I walked in. She barely looked up. "Room?" she asked. I nodded, paid cash, and signed the ledger. Her finger tapped once beside my name, like she was marking something. She handed me a key and pointed toward the stairs. "Hot water's slow," she said. "Best to let it run a minute." That was it. No welcome, no small talk. I thanked her anyway and headed to my room. The hallway upstairs was dim and narrow, carpet threadbare and damp underfoot. My room sat near the end. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I was hit with the smell of old plumbing and stale air. The room itself was simple. A bed, a dresser, a small TV, and a bathroom tucked behind a crooked door. There was a window, but it faced nothing but trees, their branches scraping faintly against the glass when the wind picked up. I tossed my bag onto the bed and checked the time. Just after 12:30 a.m. My body ached from hours of driving, and all I wanted was a hot shower to wash the road off me. I didn't turn on the bathroom light right away. The glow from the lamp in the main room spilled in just enough to see by. That's when I noticed the sign. It was taped to the inside of the bathroom door, handwritten on yellowed paper. The edges were curled, like it had been there a long time. "Do not use the shower after midnight." I stared at it, frowning. At first, I assumed it was some kind of joke. Old plumbing, maybe, or a superstition. Small places like this always had strange rules. I checked my watch again. 12:37 a.m. I should have listened. Instead, I shrugged, turned on the bathroom light, and stepped inside. The mirror was spotted and dull. The tub looked clean enough, though the porcelain was stained from age. I turned the shower handle and waited. The pipes groaned loudly in the walls, a deep, strained sound like something shifting far away. Water sputtered from the shower head, coughing and spitting air before finally flowing. But it wasn't clear. It was brown. Not rust-tinged, not faintly discolored. Thick, muddy water poured down, swirling in the tub like something pulled straight from the ground. A metallic, earthy smell filled the bathroom immediately, sharp enough to make my eyes water. "What the hell?" I muttered. I stepped back, reaching to turn it off, but before my hand touched the handle, I heard it. A whisper. Soft. Close. Right beneath the sound of running water. It said my name. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. The whisper came again, clearer this time, rising up through the rush of water like it was coming from inside the pipes. I turned the shower off so fast the handle banged against the wall. The sudden silence was crushing. I stood there listening, every nerve lit up. Nothing. No whisper. No water. Just the faint hum of the bathroom light and my own breathing. I backed out of the bathroom slowly and shut the door. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, my mind filling in gaps. I'd been alone too long, driving too late. That explanation felt thin, but I clung to it. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that brown water pouring out, heard my name whispered like it was being spoken through dirt and stone. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke to pale gray light filtering through the curtains. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Morning light has a way of doing that, making the night feel distant and unreal. I sat up, rubbed my face, and checked the time. 6:48 a.m. The bathroom door was still closed. I stared at it longer than I should have. I decided to try the shower again. Daylight made me bolder, rational. The sign had said after midnight after all. Morning should be fine. I flipped on the bathroom light and opened the door. The sign was still there, unmoving, its warning staring back at me. I ignored it and turned the shower handle slowly. This time, the water ran clear. Relief washed over me. I stepped under the stream, letting the hot water soak into my shoulders. The smell was gone. The pipes sounded normal. I laughed quietly at myself, feeling foolish for how scared I'd been. Then the whisper came back. It didn't come from the drain this time. It came from behind me. I spun around, slipping slightly in the tub, my heart leaping into my throat. The bathroom was empty. The curtain hung still. The door was shut. You shouldn't. The voice was low and hoarse, like it hadn't been used in a long time. It knew my name. It stretched the syllables, savoring them. I shut the water off and grabbed a towel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely wrap it around myself. The whispering continued, moving, drifting, like it was circling the room. We hear you at night. I ran out of the bathroom, slammed the door, and threw my clothes on without drying off properly. My skin crawled, like I was being watched from inside the walls. I shoved my things into my bag and left the room, not bothering to check out. The office was empty when I passed through. The ledger lay open on the counter. My name was already crossed out. I didn't stop driving until I hit a main road and my phone regained signal. I told myself I'd never go back there. I meant it. But that wasn't the end. Weeks later, back home, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of water running. I live alone. I hadn't turned anything on. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, and found the bathroom light on. The shower was running. Clear water poured from the shower head. I hadn't touched it. I shut it off, hands trembling, and stood there in the silence. Just as I turned to leave, I heard it again. My name. Soft. Patient. Coming from the drain. I don't shower after midnight anymore. I don't stay in old motels, and when I hear pipes creak late at night, I hold my breath and pray whatever learned my name back there in the mountains has finally forgotten it. But deep down, I know better.
I didn't plan on stopping there. That's the part that sticks with me now, years later, when I replay that night in my head. I was driving through the mountains on my way south, trying to cut through Appalachia before nightfall, but the rain came faster than I expected. It wasn't a gentle mountain rain either. It was heavy, relentless, the kind that turns the road into a narrowed black ribbon and makes every curve feel like a gamble. By the time I saw the sign for the roadside inn, my hands were tight on the wheel, and my shoulders ached from being hunched forward, squinting into the dark. The inn sat just off the highway, tucked against a steep tree line like it was trying to hide. one long two-story building with an exterior balcony running the length of the second floor. The paint was peeling, and the lights along the balcony buzzed and flickered, struggling against the rain. The parking lot was empty except for my car. That should have been my first warning, but exhaustion dulls instincts. I just wanted a bed and a roof that didn't move. The office was attached to the building, a small room with a counter and a bell that looked like it hadn't been rung in years. When I stepped inside, the air smelled damp and metallic, like wet wood and old coins. A woman appeared from a back room after a long moment. She was older, hair pulled back tight, her eyes sharp and tired at the same time. She didn't ask for my license or make small talk. She just took my cash, slid a key across the counter, and told me I was the only guest. Her tone made it sound less like information and more like a statement of fact I should already know. My room was on the second floor, halfway down the balcony. I climbed the stairs, the metal steps slick with rain, and walked past doors that all looked the same, faded numbers, chipped paint, little dark windows that reflected nothing but rain and my own tired face. When I reached my room, I unlocked it and stepped inside quickly, shaking water from my jacket. The room was plain but clean enough: a bed, a small table, a lamp, and a window looking out over the trees. The rain hammered the roof and the balcony above, loud enough that it felt like it was inside the room with me. I set my bag down, kicked off my boots, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The isolation hit me then. No other cars, no voices, just rain and the occasional groan of the building settling. I tried to sleep, but the sound of the storm kept me hovering in that half-awake state where every noise feels important. Sometime after midnight, later than that I think, I heard something that didn't belong. Knocking. Soft, steady, deliberate. It wasn't on my door at first. It was down the balcony, a few doors away. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more on the next door. I sat up in bed, heart already speeding up. The knocking moved methodically, door to door, never rushed. I told myself it was someone checking rooms, maybe the owner, maybe someone lost. But there were no voices, no footsteps between the knocks, just the sound of knuckles on wood, muffled by rain. When the knocking reached my door, it stopped me cold. 3 soft knocks, close enough that I could hear the faint vibration through the door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The handle shifted slightly, just a small test, like whoever was out there wanted to know if it was locked. I stared at it, waiting for it to turn fully. Nothing happened. The handle went still. After a long moment, the knocking resumed, moving on to the next door, then the next, fading into the rain. I stayed awake for hours after that, listening as the pattern repeated. Knock, pause, knock. Always moving in one direction along the balcony, always silent between doors. It never circled back. It just kept going until the sound disappeared completely, swallowed by the storm. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under despite myself. When I woke, the room was dim with early morning light. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. My body felt heavy, like I hadn't slept at all. I sat up and looked at the door, half expecting to see something wrong with it. Scratches, marks, anything. It looked normal. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool and smelled fresh, the storm having washed everything clean. The wood planks beneath my feet were dry, completely dry. I frowned and looked down the balcony. Every other door was surrounded by dark, wet patches where rain had blown in and soaked the wood. Mine stood alone, untouched by water, like it had been shielded somehow. I walked slowly along the balcony, checking door after door. All of them were wet. Some had puddles gathered at the threshold. Mine was the only exception. A tight, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I went back inside, packed my things, and headed for the office. The woman was there again, sitting behind the counter, hands folded. She looked at me like she'd been expecting me. I asked her about the knocking, about someone coming through in the night. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the last of the rain slid down the glass. "It happens," she said simply. "What happens?" I pressed. She hesitated, then sighed. "When it rains like that, they knock." "Who?" The word came out sharper than I meant it to. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked me which room I was in. When I told her, something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, recognition. "That door stayed dry, didn't it?" she said. I felt a chill run through me. "Yes." She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she already knew. "That's the only one they don't touch." I waited for her to explain, but she just slid my receipt across the counter and told me to drive safe. When I pushed for more, she met my eyes and said, "You don't want to know.
You don't want to be someone who knows. I left without another word. As I drove away, the end disappeared behind a bend in the road, swallowed by trees and mist. I told myself it was just a strange night, a coincidence made worse by exhaustion and weather. I almost believed it. Almost. A year later, I was passing through that stretch of road again. Curiosity pulled me off the highway, even though every instinct told me not to. I followed the familiar turn, drove past where the inn should have been, and slowed to a stop. There was nothing there. No building. No parking lot. Just a clearing overgrown with weeds and a few concrete slabs cracked and sinking into the ground. I got out of the car and walked closer. Rain clouds were gathering again, low and heavy. As the first drops began to fall, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Along the edge of the clearing, half hidden by brush, were rotted wooden planks laid out in a long line, like the remains of a balcony. In the center, one section of wood was lighter, less weathered than the rest. Dry. I didn't wait for the rain to get heavier. I got back in my car and drove until the road straightened and the trees thinned. Even now, when rain hits my roof at night just right, I hear it again. Soft, patient knocking, moving from door to door, always getting closer, always stopping just long enough to let you know it's there.
The rain had been with me for hours before I ever saw the motel. It wasn't the kind that comes down hard and fast and then moves on. This rain felt settled, like it had soaked into the mountains and decided to stay. The road twisted through dense Appalachian forest, trees rising up on both sides like walls, their branches bending low under the weight of water. My headlights reflected off the wet asphalt, creating a narrow tunnel of visibility that ended just a few feet in front of my car. Every mile marker felt like a small victory. Every curve made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. I'd passed the last town almost an hour earlier. One gas station, one diner with its lights already off, and a hand-painted sign warning about deer crossings. My phone had lost signal somewhere back there, and the radio faded in and out, swallowed by static and the sound of rain pounding against the roof. I was tired in a way that went beyond needing sleep. My eyes burned, my neck ached. When the motel sign appeared ahead, flickering weakly through the rain, I didn't feel relief so much as resignation. The building sat back from the road, partially hidden by trees that had grown wild around it. 2 stories, long and narrow, with a covered walkway and an office at one end. The sign out front buzzed and blinked, missing a few letters so the name didn't quite make sense. The parking lot was empty, no other cars. That should have bothered me more than it did. But the rain was coming down even harder now, and the thought of staying on the road felt worse than stopping. I parked close to the office and sat for a moment, listening to the engine idle. Water streamed down the windshield in uneven lines, distorting the building into something warped and unsteady. I told myself it was just a quiet place, off-season, forgotten by most people. Appalachia is full of places like that. I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the rain. The office door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and cool, carrying the smell of damp carpet and old paper. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a pale, sickly glow over the counter and the small waiting area. I stood there for a second, water dripping from my jacket onto the floor, before I realized someone was already there. The clerk stood behind the counter, facing me. I hadn't heard him move or speak. He was just there, watching. He was thin, almost gaunt, with pale skin that looked stretched tight over his face. His hair was dark and combed flat, and he wore a faded button-up shirt that might once have been part of a uniform. What struck me immediately, though, were his eyes. He didn't blink. Not once. I gave a small, awkward nod and asked if they had any rooms available.
He didn't answer right away. He just stared, his eyes fixed on my face with intensity that made me want to look away. After a few seconds that stretched uncomfortably long, he reached down, picked up a key, and set it on the counter between us. The movement was slow and deliberate, like every motion was something he had to think through. I told him I'd like to check in for the night. He nodded once. Still no blinking. He slid a ledger toward me and pointed to a line near the bottom of the page. The book looked old, its pages yellowed and curled at the edges. I wrote my name, trying not to think about how quiet it was in that room. No ticking clock, no radio, just the faint buzz of the light and the distant rain. As I signed, I became aware of something deeply unsettling. His eyes were still on me, not glancing down to watch me write, not shifting away for even a moment, just fixed, unbroken eye contact. It wasn't aggressive exactly. It felt empty, observational, like he wasn't looking at me so much as through me. I paid in cash. He took the bills and placed them in a drawer without counting them. When I picked up the key, I finally broke eye contact and turned toward the door that led to the rooms. I could feel his gaze on my back as I walked away. Halfway across the office, I glanced over my shoulder. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there, still watching. His eyes locked on me. He didn't blink. The room was on the ground floor, near the end of the building. The walkway outside was slick with rain, the wood darkened and shining under the dim exterior lights. As I walked, I noticed how quiet everything was. No televisions through the walls, no muffled conversations, no doors opening or closing. Just rain and the soft sound of my own footsteps. Inside, the room was plain but clean enough. A bed with a thin comforter, a small table with a lamp, a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. I closed the door behind me and locked it, then stood there for a moment, listening. The walls felt thin, the silence felt heavy. I set my bag down and sat on the bed, trying to shake the feeling that I'd stepped into a place that didn't quite exist anymore. I took a quick shower, the hot water easing some of the tension from my shoulders. When I came back out, I turned on the TV more for noise than anything else. Static greeted me, hissing softly. I flipped through channels, but nothing came in clearly. Eventually, I turned it off. The silence returned immediately, pressing in around me. I lay down fully clothed, staring up at the ceiling. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, a constant presence that made it hard to tell how much time was passing. My thoughts kept drifting back to the clerk's eyes, the way he hadn't blinked, the way he'd watched me leave. I told myself it was just a nervous habit, something odd but harmless. People in isolated places develop strange mannerisms. That explanation felt thin, but it was all I had. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of breathing. It was close. Too close. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest, listening. The breathing was slow and deliberate, each inhale drawn out, each exhale soft and controlled. It wasn't coming from inside the room. It was just outside the door. Close enough that I could imagine someone standing there, their face inches from the wood. I strained to hear footsteps, any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just that steady breathing and the rain beyond it. I glanced at the clock on the bedside table. 2:17 a.m. My first thought was the clerk. Maybe he was checking on guests. Maybe he needed something. The idea didn't sit right, but fear makes you look for normal explanations. I cleared my throat and called out if everything was okay. The breathing didn't change. I sat up slowly, every muscle tense. The sound seemed to follow me, staying right outside the door no matter how I shifted. I crept closer, my bare feet silent on the carpet. When I reached the door, I placed my ear against it, careful not to touch the handle. The breathing stopped. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the sound itself. My ears rang in the silence. I waited, holding my breath, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. I stepped back, my skin crawling. After a moment, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Half asleep, overtired. I returned to the bed, But sleep didn't come easily after that. Every time I started to drift off, I thought I heard it again, the faintest whisper of air moving just beyond the door. Sometime before dawn, I finally slept. I woke up with the uneasy feeling of being watched. The room was gray with early morning light, rain still streaking down the window. I sat up and looked around. Everything seemed normal. The door was closed. The lock was still engaged. No signs of anyone having been there. I packed my things quickly, eager to leave. As I stepped outside, the rain soaked into my shoes immediately. The parking lot was still empty. The forest beyond the building loomed dark and wet, mist rising from the ground. I walked back to the office, my stomach knotted with a sense of urgency I couldn't fully explain. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was empty. No clerk behind the counter. No movement. The fluorescent light was off, leaving the room dim and shadowed. Dust coated the counter in a thin, undisturbed layer, as if no one had touched it in a long time. I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. No answer. As I turned to leave, something on the wall caught my eye. A sign, faded and crooked, partially hidden behind a stack of old brochures. I stepped closer and wiped away the dust with my sleeve. Closed since 1998. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the sign, my mind struggling to make sense of it. That wasn't possible. I'd just checked in the night before. I'd spoken to the clerk. I'd paid him. My heart started to race. I backed away slowly, glancing around the room. The ledger I'd signed was still on the counter. I flipped it open, my hands shaking. The last entry wasn't mine. It was dated years earlier. I left without checking out. As I drove away, the rain finally began to lighten. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and quiet. I told myself I'd imagined the sign, that it was some kind of decoration, a mistake, a remnant someone forgot to take down. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the image of the clerk's unblinking eyes stayed with me. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying awake and the house is quiet, I think about that breathing outside the door. I wonder if it was ever really meant for me, or if I just passed through a place where time had stalled, where something was still doing its job long after it should have stopped. And every now and then, when I catch my reflection in a dark window, I find myself staring a little too long.
The motel didn't look like much when I pulled in, but by that point, I wasn't being picky. I'd been driving through the mountains for most of the day, and the weather had turned ugly faster than forecasted. Rain rolled in heavy and sideways, turning the road into a black ribbon of glare and reflection. Cell service vanished miles back, and the last town I passed looked like it shut down for the night sometime in the early 90s. When I saw the faded vacancy sign glowing weakly through the rain, it felt like the only sensible choice left. The building sat low and long, pressed up against a tree line so dense it swallowed whatever light reached it. The forest rose immediately behind the motel, dark trunks packed tight together, branches overlapping like ribs. The place had maybe a dozen rooms, all exterior doors, and a small office at one end with a dim light burning inside. No other car sat in the lot. I remember noticing how quiet it was, even with the rain hammering down. No traffic noise, no insects, nothing moving in the woods. Just rain and my own engine ticking as it cooled. The check-in was quick and uncomfortable. The woman behind the desk barely spoke, just handed me a key and told me which room was mine. She didn't ask where I was headed or how long I planned to stay. When I thanked her, she nodded once, eyes flicking toward the hallway like she was eager for me to leave the office. I chalked it up to tiredness or local reserve and didn't push it. My room was near the middle of the building. The door stuck slightly when I opened it, swelling from years of moisture, and the smell hit me immediately. Old carpet, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like wet pennies. The room itself was small but clean enough. Bed, nightstand, lamp, dresser, and a boxy television bolted to the top like an afterthought. A window faced the woods, the glass streaked with rain so thick the trees beyond looked like shadows pressed against it. I dropped my bag, kicked off my boots, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The rain was louder here, drumming on the roof and the gutters in a steady, relentless rhythm. It felt isolating in a way I hadn't expected, like I'd stepped into a pocket where the rest of the world couldn't reach. I turned on the TV mostly for background noise. The screen flickered, then filled with static. Not unusual for a place like that. I flipped through channels, but every one was the same. snowy, hissing, with faint lines drifting across the screen. I left it on anyway, turned the volume down low, and went to take a shower. The water pressure was weak, but it was hot, and for a few minutes I relaxed, letting the sound of the rain and the water drown out everything else. When I came back into the room, toweled around my waist, I noticed the TV volume had gone up, just slightly, but enough that I stopped and stared at it. Underneath the static, there was something else. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, my brain trying to make patterns out of noise. But as I stood there listening, I realized I was hearing voices. Low, indistinct, like people talking in another room with the door closed. I stepped closer to the TV, my skin prickling. He's standing now. The words were faint but unmistakable. I froze, one hand still gripping the towel. The voice sounded neutral, almost bored, like someone narrating a routine task. I waited, barely breathing, and the static surged, swallowing the sound again. I told myself it was interference, radio bleed-through, something picking up a stray signal. That explanation made sense enough that I forced myself to believe it. I turned the volume down further and got dressed. As I moved around the room, I kept glancing at the TV. The static never changed, but every now and then I thought I heard something beneath it. A word, a breath, always just on the edge of hearing. I sat on the bed and picked up my phone out of habit, even though I knew there was no service. The screen lit up my hands in the lower part of the room. As I checked the time, the voice came back, clearer this time. He's sitting on the bed. My stomach dropped. The words matched exactly what I was doing. I stood up so fast the phone slipped from my hand and hit the carpet. The static hissed louder, and for a moment I thought I heard more than one voice, a low murmur, like several people whispering at once. I backed away from the TV until my shoulders hit the wall. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to say something else. He's scared now. I lunged forward and slammed the power button. The screen went black instantly, the room falling into a heavy silence broken only by the rain outside. I stood there shaking, my hand still pressed to the TV, listening. Nothing. I laughed softly, a nervous, breathless sound. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. Stress, exhaustion, bad weather. That was all it was. I unplugged the TV from the wall anyway, just to be safe, and pushed the cord back behind the dresser. I sat on the bed again, trying to slow my breathing. The silence felt thick, almost physical. After a few minutes, I started to calm down. I told myself I just had a weird moment, that the brain does strange things when you're tired and alone. Then I heard it again. Not from the TV. The voice came from the corner of the room, low and close, like someone standing just out of sight. He unplugged it. I felt the blood drain from my face. My eyes darted around the room, searching for the source. The bathroom door was open. The closet stood empty. The window showed only rain and black forest. The voice continued, joined now by another, then another, overlapping and whispering. He thinks that stops it. He doesn't know. I backed toward the door, my hand fumbling for the handle. The voices weren't loud, but they were clear now, no longer masked by static. They described everything I did, the way my hand shook, the way my breathing sped up, the way my eyes kept flicking to the unplugged TV like it might turn itself back on. I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the rain-soaked walkway. The cold air hit me hard, but it grounded me enough to move. I didn't bother locking the door. I just ran. The office light was still on, a dull yellow glow at the end of the building. I sprinted toward it, rain soaking me instantly, my bare feet slapping against the wet concrete. The voices followed me, not echoing from behind, but staying close, like they were inside my head now. He's running. Nowhere to go. I burst into the office, breathless and shaking, and slammed the door behind me. The woman behind the desk looked up sharply, startled for the first time since I'd seen her. I tried to explain what was happening, the words tumbling out of me in a panicked rush. The voices, the TV, the way it knew what I was doing. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more drawn with every word. When I finished, she let out a slow breath and rubbed her temples. "You shouldn't have turned it on," she said quietly. That sentence scared me more than anything else had so far. "What?" I asked. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the hallway leading to the rooms, then back at me. "Those sets," she said. "They're not connected to anything anymore. Haven't been for years." My mouth went dry. "Then how?" I asked. "Storms bring things in," she said, cutting me off. "Signals, sounds, sometimes more than that." She met my eyes. "They listen, they watch, and when you notice them noticing you, they don't like to be ignored." A sharp crack of thunder shook the building, making the lights flicker. For a split second, I thought I heard the static again, faint and distant. "I want to leave," I said. "Right now." She nodded. "That's probably best." I didn't go back to my room. She gave me a towel and let me dry off a little while I waited for the rain to ease enough to drive. We didn't talk anymore after that. She just sat there, hands folded, staring at the wall like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. When the rain finally lightened, I left. I didn't look back at the building as I drove away. I focused on the road,
on the way the trees blurred past, on anything that kept my mind from replaying those voices. I made it home just before dawn. I didn't sleep that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard static. Soft, endless, patient. Weeks passed, then months. I convinced myself it was over. That whatever I'd experienced was tied to that place, that storm, that night. Life moved on. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the weather turns bad, my television flickers for just a moment before settling into the picture, and underneath the normal sounds of whatever I'm watching, I swear I can still hear it. A faint hiss, and voices, low and calm, describing me sitting there, listening, pretending I don't hear them anymore.
By the time I pulled into the motel, my nerves were already shot. I'd been driving the back roads through Appalachia for hours, taking a shortcut I'd been told would save time. It didn't. The road narrowed the deeper I went, the forest closing in so tight it felt like I was driving through a tunnel of wet branches and shadow. My GPS lost signal somewhere near a rusted bridge, and after that I was just following road signs that looked older than I was. When the rain started, it came down hard and sudden, like the mountains had been waiting for me to get lost before they opened up the sky. The motel appeared around a bend without warning. One moment there was nothing but trees and rain. The next there was a long, low building crouched beside the road, its sign buzzing faintly. Vacancy glowed in uneven red letters, some brighter than others. The parking lot stretched out in front of it, wide and cracked, painted with dozens of faded white lines. It looked like it had been built for crowds that never came anymore. I slowed, headlights sweeping across the empty asphalt. No cars, not a single one. That should have been a sign to keep driving, but the rain was coming down in sheets now, and the road behind me felt just as dangerous as whatever waited ahead. I pulled into a spot near the middle of the lot and turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt wrong. The rain was loud, sure, but there was no other sound. No traffic, no distant engines, no wind in the trees, just rain hitting metal and pavement. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, watching the motel through the windshield. The windows were dark, except for the office, where a single light glowed dimly. Inside, the office smelled like damp carpet and old wood. A man stood behind the counter, his posture stiff, his eyes sunken and tired. He looked at me like I was interrupting something. I asked for a room. He nodded without smiling, slid a key across the counter, and told me the price. We didn't exchange names. He didn't ask for my license. He just took my cash and pointed down the walkway toward my room. "You're the only one here," he said, almost as an afterthought. The room was at the far end of the building. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me. The room was basic: bed, dresser, lamp, bathroom, but clean enough. The window faced the parking lot. From there, I could see every empty space, the rain turning the asphalt into a dark mirror. My car sat alone among the lines, looking small and out of place. I set my bag down and sat on the bed, listening. The rain hammered the roof and gutters, steady and relentless. After a while, I heard something else, a car door slamming. I froze, my head snapping toward the window. I watched the lot, expecting to see headlights or movement. Nothing, just rain. A few seconds later, I heard it again, another door slam, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of an engine turning over. It idled low, rough, like an old truck. I stood and went to the window, pressing my forehead lightly against the glass. The parking lot was still empty. No headlights, no taillights, no cars at all. The engine sound cut off abruptly. Silence returned, heavy and thick. I told myself it had to be noise from the road, maybe echoing through the trees. Sound travels strangely in the mountains, especially at night. I forced myself to relax, turned on the lamp, and sat back down. It didn't stop. Over the next hour, I heard doors slamming all across the lot. Some sounded close, others further away. Engines started and idled, then shut off. Once I heard what sounded like someone revving an engine, impatient, like they were stuck waiting for something. Every time I looked out the window, the lot was empty. I checked the time, just after midnight.
Sleep wasn't happening. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tense. The sounds continued at irregular intervals. Sometimes there would be long stretches of nothing, long enough that I'd start to convince myself it was over. Then a sudden slam would make me flinch, my heart racing. At one point I heard footsteps. Not on the walkway outside my room, but on the asphalt. Slow, deliberate steps, accompanied by the soft squelch of wet ground. They moved past my window, close enough that I expected to see a shadow. I didn't. I considered calling the front desk, but the idea of picking up the phone made my stomach nod. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I didn't know why I felt that way, but the instinct was strong enough that I listened to it. Sometime in the early morning hours, exhaustion finally dragged me under. I slept lightly, dreaming of headlights sweeping across empty spaces, of doors opening onto nothing. When I woke, the rain had stopped. Pale gray light filled the room. For a moment, I lay there, listening, half expecting to hear engines or footsteps again. There was nothing, just birds somewhere in the trees, and the faint drip of water from the roof. I got up and went to the window. The parking lot looked different in daylight. Still empty, but marked now. Dark, muddy footprints crisscrossed the asphalt, clear as day. They were everywhere, between parking spaces, around where cars should have been, clustered in places like people had been standing and talking. My breath caught in my throat. The footprints were wrong. Some were boot prints, heavy and deep. Others were bare, toes splayed wide, heels pressed hard into the mud. They all pointed in the same general direction, leading toward the far edge of the lot, toward the woods behind the motel. I followed them outside, my heart pounding. The air smelled clean after the rain, but there was an underlying odor of wet earth and something sour. The footprints were even cleared up close. Some overlapped, some were half west away, but the trail was obvious. It started around my car. I walked around it slowly. Mud was smeared along the sides, handprints pressed into the doors and trunk like people had leaned against it. The hood bore faint marks, as if someone had rested their weight there. My stomach churned. The footprints were way away from my car in a wide line, dozens of them, heading straight into the trees. The forest edge was dark and dense, branches tangled together, undergrowth thick and wet. The ground beyond the lot was churned up, the mud torn apart by many feet moving in the same direction. They didn't come back. I stood there for a long time, staring at the trail disappearing into the woods. Every instinct screamed at me to get back inside, to leave, to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. But a part of me, the part that wanted answers, lingered. I went to the office to check out. The door was unlocked, but the room was empty. No clerk, no sign of anyone having been there recently. Dust coated the counter. The guest ledger lay open, its last entry dated days before. Mine wasn't there. I didn't wait. I went back to my room, grabbed my bag, and got in my car. As I pulled out of the lot, I looked one last time at the footprints leading into the woods. The trees stood still, silent, offering nothing back. I drove until the road widened and the forest thinned, until my phone regained signal and civilization felt real again. I told myself I'd imagined parts of it, that exhaustion and isolation had played tricks on me, that there had to be a logical explanation for the sounds, for the footprints. But sometimes late at night, when it's quiet and my car is parked outside my house, I swear I hear it again, a door slamming somewhere close, an engine idling just out of sight. And when I look out the window, the street is empty, but the feeling that something was there, something that gathered around my car and then left together into the dark, refuses to fade. Whatever walked through that parking lot that night didn't need cars, and it didn't need to come back.
I remembered the rain more than anything else. Not just the sound of it, but the weight of it. Like the sky had decided to settle into the mountains and stay there. I'd been driving for hours through Appalachia, and my headlights felt useless against the wall of water pouring down. When the motel sign finally appeared, flickering red and blue through the rain, it felt less like relief and more like surrender. The place looked tired. 2 stories, long and low, with paint that had once been white, but now looked gray and swollen from decades of moisture. Half the letters on the sign were burned out, leaving a name I couldn't quite piece together. The parking lot was mostly empty, puddles reflecting the neon in broken pieces. I sat in my car for a full minute before getting out, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, wondering if I should just keep driving. But the rain wasn't letting up, and my eyes were burning from fatigue. I grabbed my bag and ran for the office. Inside,
The air smelled like damp carpet and old cigarettes, even though there were no ashtrays anywhere. A single desk lamp lit the front counter. Behind it sat a man who looked like he'd been carved out of the same wood as the mountains, thin, pale, and still. He didn't greet me. He just looked up slowly, his eyes settling on me with a kind of dull patience, like he'd been waiting a long time for someone to walk in. I asked if they had any rooms. He nodded once, reached under the counter, and slid a key across to me without a word. The key was attached to a heavy metal tag stamped with a number. I glanced at the board behind him out of habit, the one that usually shows which rooms are vacant. Several numbers were missing, little hooks hanging empty, but the number on my key wasn't among them. I almost mentioned it, but something about the way he was watching me made me stop. I paid, signed my name in a ledger that looked older than the building itself, and turned toward the hallway. "Storm's gonna last all night," he said suddenly, his voice low and dry. It startled me enough that I jumped. When I turned back, he was already looking down again, as if the moment had passed. The hallway felt colder than the office. The carpet squished faintly under my shoes, and the smell of mildew grew stronger with every step. The lights overhead buzzed softly, some brighter than others, creating patches of shadow that felt deeper than they should have been. My room was at the far end. As I walked, I noticed how quiet it was. No televisions, no voices, no sounds from other rooms. Just the rain outside and my own footsteps. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was cold, not just unheated, but the kind of cold that sinks into your clothes and settles there. I set my bag down and looked around. The room was clean enough but outdated. Floral bedspread, heavy curtains, a small TV bolted to a dresser. I pulled the curtains back, expecting to see my car and the wet glow of the parking lot lights. Instead, there were trees. Dense, dark woods pressed right up against the window, branches so close they brushed the glass when the wind moved them. I frowned, confused, and stepped closer. The parking lot had been on the other side of the building. There shouldn't have been woods here. I told myself it was just the layout. Maybe the building curved or the lot wrapped around somewhere else. I let the curtains fall back into place and went to wash my hands. The water took a long time to warm, and when it did, it carried a faint rusty smell. I lay down fully clothed on the bed, listening to the rain hammer the roof. Exhaustion pulled me under faster than fear could. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the room was completely dark. The power must have gone out. For a moment, I couldn't tell what had woken me, and then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to be a person, but measured, like they weren't in a hurry to get anywhere. The steps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then the footsteps started again, moving away, only to return a few minutes later and stop in the exact same place. This went on for what felt like hours. The sound would approach, pause, then fade, only to come back again. Every time it stopped, it was directly in front of my door. I lay there staring into the darkness, my heart pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Eventually, curiosity or fear, I'm still not sure which, pushed me to get up. I crept to the door and pressed my eye to the people. The hallway was empty. No shadows, no movement, just the dim emergency lights casting a sickly glow on the carpet. I waited, watching, until my eyes started to ache. Nothing happened. When I stepped back, the footsteps started again, right outside, even though there was no one there when I looked. Sleep after that came in fragments. Every time I drifted off, the sound of those steps would pull me back. At one point, I thought I heard breathing, slow and wet, on the other side of the door, but when I pressed my ear against it, there was nothing but the hum of the building and the distant rain. Morning came without sunlight. The sky outside was still heavy and gray, the rain reduced to a steady drizzle. I packed my things quickly, eager to get out. When I opened the door, The hallway looked different, brighter, somehow, but also more worn. The carpet was stained in places I hadn't noticed before, dark patches that looked old. I went straight to the office. The clerk was there, sitting in the same position as the night before. I told him about the noise, about the footsteps, about the cold. As I spoke, his expression didn't change. When I mentioned my room number, he finally looked up fully. "That room's not on the board," I replied. "That's why I'm asking." He shook his head slowly. "No, I mean, that room isn't listed. Hasn't been for a long time." A tight feeling settled in my chest. "You gave me the key." He leaned back in his chair and studied me in a way that felt invasive, like he was trying to see past my skin. "Storm like this one," he said quietly. "Years back, Mad stayed in that room. Said he heard someone walking the halls all night. Went missing before morning." I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. "So I rent it out?" I asked. He looked past me, toward the rain-streaked window. "Didn't think anyone would take it." I handed the key back, my fingers numb. He didn't touch it. It sat there on the counter between us, heavy and cold. I turned and left without another word. Outside, the parking lot looked wrong. The puddles were deeper, the lines faded. When I got to my car, I noticed mud smeared along the driver's side, thick and dark, like something had brushed against it. I drove away as fast as the road would let me, the motel disappearing in my rearview mirror. I didn't tell anyone about what happened for a long time. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, stress, a bad night in a bad place. But sometimes when it rains hard and the sound of footsteps echoes down an empty hallway, I'm back in that room, staring through the peephole at nothing, knowing something is standing just out of sight, waiting for the storm to pass.
I first saw the motel in the heavy fog of a late Appalachian afternoon, just as the road began to narrow and the forest closed in on both sides. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the asphalt into a slick ribbon, and my headlights barely penetrated the mist. The building crouched low, pressed against the tree line like it was hiding from the world, a crooked neon sign sputtering in and out. Vacancy. The lot was almost empty, save for a few rusted posts where other cars had long since been gone. I should have kept driving, but the rain was coming down hard, and the woods behind the motel seemed to swallow any hope of finding another place for miles. I needed a roof, dry walls, and a bed. The office smelled of wet wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. A woman stood behind the counter, hunched over, her eyes half hidden beneath heavy lids. She didn't smile. She didn't look at me when I walked in, only extended a hand toward the guest book and a pen, along with a key. "Room 3, she said, voice flat, monotone, almost indifferent. "Sign the book." I nodded, taking the pen. The book was heavier than I expected, leather-bound and damp, the pages curling at the edges. I flipped through it and froze. Each page wasn't filled with names or dates. They were only apologies. Short notes scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. The rain. I should have left earlier. Apologies. I stayed too long. The forest. It got in my head. Sorry for being here. I can't explain why. Rain all night. Regret all morning." Each entry mentioned rain, always remorse. I laughed nervously and shrugged it off. Maybe the motel had a weird tradition, some kind of strange joke for travelers. I signed my name at the next available line, added the date, and then glanced at the last page. My stomach sank. Written there, in neat, precise letters, was my name. My name, already signed as if someone knew I would arrive before I had even done so.
The date next to it was today's date. My hand trembled as I closed the book. The room itself smelled of damp carpet and old wood, heavy with the scent of rain. A small cracked window faced the edge of the forest, and the storm had picked up again, rain hammering the roof and gutters. I set my bag down and tried to focus on something else. The TV flickered on, but no channels came through, only a faint hum of static. I turned it off. I had no interest in sitting and waiting. As night fell, the wind in the trees grew louder, the branches scraping against the glass like nails. I lay on the bed, listening, and eventually drifted into a shallow sleep, the storm lulling me despite the unease in my chest. Around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of scratching, not at the window, not at the door, scratching along the walls. I sat up, straining to hear. The storm raged outside, rain hammering and rhythmic drumming, but the scratching persisted, slow, deliberate, almost conversational in its cadence. My pulse jumped. I told myself it was just the building settling, old wood expanding and contracting in the storm. Then I heard a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, my name. I froze. The whisper repeated, and this time I caught the words more clearly. You shouldn't be here. I sat upright, every muscle taut. The voice sounded like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. I grabbed my flashlight, heart hammering, and shone it around the room. Nothing moved. The rain beat down relentlessly, pounding against the tin roof. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was a trick of the storm, maybe my exhaustion, but the sense of being watched clung to me. Sleep didn't come again that night. I stayed awake, listening to the building's groans, the scratching along the walls, the wind that whispered through the trees. Every now and then I glanced at the guest book on the dresser. Something about it called to me, a silent insistence. I wanted to see if the entries had changed. I picked it up and turned the pages. The apologies were still there, hundreds of them, everyone mentioning rain, regret, the forest, leaving too late, staying too long. And at the very end, the last page was different. Beneath my name, freshly scrawled, was a short note I didn't remember writing. I should have left before midnight. I'm sorry. My blood ran cold. I hadn't written it. I hadn't even touched the book since signing in. My hand shook as I slammed the guest book shut. The sound of the storm was deafening now, rain thrumming on the roof like a drum, branches scraping against the window, whispering in voices I couldn't quite understand. I sat in the dark, clutching the book to my chest. The whispering began again, this time clearer, all around the room. You should leave. You can't stay. The air felt heavy, damp, as though the storm had seeped into the walls and now pressed down on me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my feet felt glued to the carpet. I remember standing eventually, moving slowly toward the door. The hallway outside was dark, the wet carpet glinting faintly from the light in the office. As I crept past the rooms, I noticed something I hadn't before. The doors were slightly ajar. I had been the only guest, but now it looked like someone or something had been moving between them. Wet footprints led from one room to the next, never stopping, always moving forward into the darkness. I felt my stomach twist. The rain outside was heavier now, the branches thrashing violently. I wanted to call for the clerk to demand answers, but when I reached the office, it was empty. The door was unlocked, the light flickering, but no one sat behind the counter. Dust covered the surface, and the ledger lay open. My name was there, written again in the same neat script. Below it, you cannot leave yet. I turned and ran down the hall. The footprints in the carpet seemed to move with me, shifting slightly, as if they were alive, guiding me, watching me. I reached my room, yanked open the door, and the guest book fell from the dresser to the floor. The pages fanned open, hundreds of apologies staring at me, all mentioning rain and regret. And there, in the middle, the last line of the last page, written in a hand I knew was not my own. We've been waiting for you. I don't remember how I got out of the building. I only remember the parking lot, empty except for my car, rain pounding down, headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. I drove without stopping, my hands gripping the wheel, eyes wide, listening for something following me in the forest, in the storm. I didn't look back, and I didn't slow until the mountains finally opened to the main road. Months have passed. I've tried to forget. I've told myself it was exhaustion, stress, some trick of the storm and the isolation. But sometimes, late at night, when rain taps against my window, I see the guest book on my dresser. It lies there closed, leather-bound and heavy, as though it has been waiting. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I can hear it faintly. Apologies, rain, regret, and my name waiting for me again. I never open it. I never will. But the memory of that motel, the forest pressing in, the weight of hundreds of names and apologies stays with me. And deep down, I know that one day, rain will call me back, and I'll be forced to write in the guest book again.
I first noticed the motel as the last light of day was swallowed by the mountains. The road I had been following narrowed into gravel, slick with rain that had been falling steadily since mid-afternoon.
Fog clung to the trees, thick and white, reducing the forest to ghostly shadows. The neon sign was weak, flickering so faintly I almost drove past it. Vacancy. The parking lot stretched out in front of the building, cracked and uneven, puddles forming in every low spot. Only one other car had been there earlier, and now it was gone, leaving me alone with the empty lot and the storm. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and old wood. A thin man stood behind the counter, hunched forward, pale light reflecting off his spectacles. He didn't look up at me until I had already handed him my ID. Then, finally, a nod, and he handed me a key. No welcome, no questions. He muttered something about upstairs, room 5, before retreating to a shadowed corner behind the counter. I followed the narrow hallway, carpet damp under my shoes, walls painted a pale yellow that had faded into gray over years of neglect. I found the room at the end, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of mold and stale smoke, with the faint tang of something metallic lingering in the air. The bed was made, a thin quilt stretched over it, and a dresser sat opposite the window. The storm rattled the panes, branches scraping gently against the glass. I dropped my bag onto the bed and let out a sigh, the long drive catching up to me. I didn't notice the subtle shift at first, the sense that the room felt heavier somehow, weighed down, not just by furniture, but by something else. I undressed and climbed onto the bed, the quilt cool against my skin. I remember that night being too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against you and fills the room with itself. I tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't ignore it for long, the faint sound of breathing. At first I thought it was my imagination. Storms like this make the walls groan and the pipes moan. But then it became clear, deliberate, slow and steady. Inhale, pause. Exhale, pause. Inhale. It was coming from under the bed. My heart seized in my chest. I told myself it was impossible. There was nothing under the bed except dust, maybe a rat or some stray piece of debris. But the breaths were too slow, too deliberate, too measured to belong to a small animal. I lay frozen, listening, my entire body pressed into the mattress as if I could melt into it and disappear. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in that room. Every time I thought I worked up the courage to peek, the sound stopped. Just as I relaxed, thinking I had been imagining it, it would start again. Slow, deep, measured, always there, beneath me, under the mattress I was lying on. I felt my skin crawl, the sweat prickling along my arms and back. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run into the storm outside, but my legs wouldn't move. Fear had frozen me in place. I tried speaking aloud. Hello. My voice sounded strange in the heavy, wet air of the room. The breathing didn't change, didn't stop. It just continued. I imagined whatever it was, curled up beneath me, watching, listening. I couldn't move, I couldn't look. My mind filled with images of hands, small and pale, reaching from the darkness, gripping the sides of the bed frame. At some point, exhaustion won. I must have drifted into a shallow, restless sleep, the breaths continuing even in the edges of my dreams. I woke to a sound of a floorboard creaking, just outside the door. The storm had softened to a drizzle, rain dripping in irregular patterns from the eaves, and the hallway was faintly lit by the flickering exit sign. I sat up, shaking. The bed felt wrong beneath me. Every inch of it pressed differently against the mattress, as though something heavy had been there, holding me down. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, staring at the carpet. It was flattened in the exact shape of the bed frame, pressed deep into the fibers as though some enormous weight had been resting there for years, not just flattened, but molded into the carpet. I checked under the bed. Nothing. Just dust, shadows, and the faint metallic smell lingering in the air. My pulse rattled in my ears. Every nerve screamed that I had not been alone. I touched the carpet where the imprint ended. The fibers were cool, unnaturally so, and they seemed to cling slightly to my fingers. I tried to leave, tried to convince myself it had been my imagination, but every step I took toward the door felt heavier. The air thickened around me, and I kept glancing back at the bed. The sense of presence didn't leave. It waited, patient and unmoving, beneath the mattress that had felt alive all night. Downstairs, the office was empty. The man behind the counter was gone, and a guest ledger lay open. No signatures from anyone else, just the dates and room numbers from long ago. I left a note saying I had checked out, but
It felt ridiculous, insignificant. Driving back onto the mountain roads, the storm had passed completely. Light broke through clouds, illuminating the forest in pale gray and green. But the memory clung to me. The slow, measured breathing beneath the bed, the heavy imprint pressed into the carpet, and the feeling that I had shared my room with something patient, something that had waited all night just beneath me, hidden but aware. I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. The image of that room, the weight under the bed, and the breaths I could feel against my own body refused to leave me. Sometimes late at night, when the wind moves in the trees just right, I swear I hear it again. Slow, steady, patient, breathing beneath me, waiting, and I can't sleep. I never can. Even now I feel the memory of that room in my chest, in the way the air presses against me, in the way the dark seems heavier than it should. I know I was not alone. I know it was real, and I know that the imprint under the bed is still there somewhere, waiting for the next person who thinks they can rest in peace, unaware of what sleeps beneath.
I first saw the motel as a shadow in the mist, neon flickering faintly, like it was struggling to stay alive. The Appalachian road had been twisting for hours, slick with rain, and the low clouds had swallowed everything but the faint glow of my headlights. I was exhausted, soaked, and ready to be anywhere else. The sign read simply, "Vacancy," swinging slightly in the wind, a thin wash of light spilling across the cracked asphalt. The parking lot was empty, or maybe it was just fog hiding whatever cars might have been there. I slowed, thinking I'd stop for warmth, a bed, a dry place out of the storm. Inside, the air was thick and damp, smelling of wet wood, old carpet, and something faintly metallic that made my stomach tighten. The front desk clerk looked older than he should have, hunched over, eyes pale, watching me as I fumbled with the door handle. He didn't greet me, didn't ask questions. He slid a key across the counter with a hand that trembled slightly. "Room 12, he muttered, almost like he was warning me without the words. I took the key, the sound of the storm outside hammering against the tin roof, and went upstairs. The hallway was narrow, lined with doors that all looked the same: faded wood, peeling paint, tarnished brass numbers. I found room 12 at the end, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The air smelled of damp fabric and mildew. The bed was neatly made, the dresser was scratched and old, and a window looked out onto the empty parking lot. I dropped my bag, shivering, and let the storm outside drown my thoughts. I told myself I would rest, sleep, and leave in the morning. Morning came, or what I thought was morning, but when I opened the door, the sky was gray and heavy, the rain still falling in sheets. I got into my car, determined to finally leave, but the road didn't go where I remembered. Every turn I took, every stretch of asphalt, curved me back toward the motel. I slowed, thinking I had misread a sign, but the trees pressed in, mist thick between them, and there it was, the flickering neon, just ahead, welcoming me back. I stopped in the lot, staring at the building like it had grown taller in the night, the roof slanting in ways that defied my memory. I tried again, taking a different route, heading deeper into the mountains. The rain came down harder this time, battering my windshield, splashing off the sides of my car, pooling in puddles that reflected the gray sky. The road twisted, dipped, and I swear I could feel the asphalt itself bending, curving me back. And there it was again, glowing faintly through the mist, waiting. The same motel, the same sign. I thought I was dreaming,
That exhaustion and wet roads had broken my mind, but the evidence was there. Wet asphalt, tire tracks, puddles forming around my tires, all leading straight back to the same place. I parked and got out, boots sinking slightly into mud, rain soaking through my jacket almost instantly. The wind tugged at my sleeves and hair. The door to the motel opened slowly before I could even touch it, and inside, the same smell greeted me: damp carpet, wet wood, and that metallic tang that made my stomach turn. The clerk was there again, hunched, motionless, eyes pale and unblinking. He didn't move, didn't speak. I swallowed and held the key in my hand. He watched me, and I knew he was waiting for me to do something I didn't understand. I ran upstairs, ignoring the numbers, ignoring the layout. Every hallway seemed longer than I remembered, stretching into corners and shadows that shouldn't exist. Each door looked identical, each room the same: made-up beds, damp carpet, a faint smell of rain clinging to the air. I could feel the building around me, pressing close, as if it were alive. I tried to open a door to leave, any door, but the key refused to turn. My heart was hammering. The storm outside continued to beat against the walls, the wind in the trees scraping and whining like voices in the mist. Hours passed, though I couldn't say how many. I wandered the halls, the same rooms repeating themselves, the same hallway stretching on forever. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows, something moving behind the frosted glass of doors, but when I turned, nothing was there. The sense of being watched was constant, unrelenting. I shouted, begged for anyone to explain, and my voice seemed to be swallowed by the wet air and the hum of fluorescent lights above. When I finally stumbled back to the lobby, the clerk was gone. The ledger lay open on the counter, empty except for the key I had left on the top. I flipped through it, hoping for some clue, but the pages were blank, except for my own name written repeatedly in neat, deliberate script across every page. And then, at the bottom of the last page, a note: "The storm always brings you back." I fled to my car again, but the lot was gone, or maybe it had never been there. The road stretched ahead, slick and twisting, and the rain pressed down in sheets. I drove blindly, but every turn, every mile, curved me back toward the same place, the same neon flickering in the mist, the same building crouched at the edge of the forest, waiting. By the time the storm finally stopped, the sun breaking weakly through gray clouds, I realized I was the only one left who still wanted to go home. Every other car, every other person, had vanished from the roads, leaving me alone with the mountains, the forest, and the motel that refused to let me leave. I parked one last time, staring at the building, the mist curling around the edges, and for the first time, I understood that this wasn't about geography, or roads, or maps. It was about something else, something patient, hidden in the folds of the mountains, in the mist and rain that curved the roads back, kept me here, waiting. I didn't enter the motel again, didn't get out of the car. I just sat, soaked and trembling, watching the empty lot and the misty forest beyond. And when the wind shifted, I thought I heard faint footsteps on the wet pavement, moving toward me, slow and deliberate. I left eventually, or thought I did, but every time it rains in the mountains, every time the fog presses close, I feel it, the road curling back, the neon sign flickering, the sense that no matter where I drive, I'll be brought back. Years have passed, but I still see it in my dreams. The motel at the edge of the forest, the endless hallways, the clerk with eyes that never blink, waiting for me to come back. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind presses against my windows, I swear I can hear the rain on the roof of that building, calling me, bending the roads, waiting. I don't know if I'll ever leave, or if the mountains have claimed me as one of their own, curling the path back again and again, until I forget what it means to go home. The road is patient, the storm is patient, and I am still learning that some exits are illusions, some departures are promises you can't keep, and some places are meant to trap you forever.
The motel was almost invisible until I was on top of it. I'd been driving the Appalachian backroads for hours, the rain hammering my windshield, trees leaning close on either side, dark and heavy with water. The GPS had died somewhere back near a bend, where the pavement gave way to gravel. I followed a faded sign that pointed to the next town, only to find myself at a long, low building crouched against the forest edge, a neon sign flickering weakly. Vacancy. There were no other cars, not a single one. The lot was cracked and puddled, painted with spaces that had been empty for years. I should have driven past. I didn't. The office smelled like damp wood and old cigarette smoke. Behind the counter, a man with gray hair and lined skin barely looked up when I asked for a room. He slid a key across the counter without a word. No pleasantries, no questions. I took it and headed to the hallway, the carpet soft and wet under my feet, the air thick with the smell of mildew. The rooms lined the corridor on either side, their doors all shut, heavy and worn. My room was halfway down the hall. I inserted the key, turned it, and the door clicked open. I stepped inside, letting the weight of the drive fall from my shoulders. The room smelled faintly of damp carpet and soap that had sat too long in a plastic dispenser. The bed was neatly made, a lamp on the nightstand, a dresser against the wall. I tossed my bag down and went to the window. The storm had picked up, rain thrumming against the glass, trees swaying in the wind. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. I stripped out of my wet clothes and hung them over the chair. I'd been on the road long enough that a hot shower was almost sacred. I didn't notice the little note pinned to the inside of the door until after I dropped my bag. "Do not let it go past midnight," it read, in shaky, hurried handwriting. I didn't know what it meant, and I tucked it into my pocket, assuming it was a warning from some previous guest or a leftover from staff instructions. I turned on the shower and let the warm water pour over me, letting it wash the road and rain off my skin. I was too tired to notice the faint metallic smell that mixed with the soap and water, or the quiet groaning of the pipes that seemed almost alive in the walls. By the time I toweled off and went to my bed, I was exhausted. I fell asleep quickly, listening to the storm, the wind rattling the eaves. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a soft click. My eyes opened, and the hallway outside my room was dimly lit by the flickering exit sign. I thought I'd imagined it, the storm playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it again, the click of a door opening somewhere down the hall, slow and deliberate. I stayed on my bed, listening. The sound repeated, moving along the hallway. And then I realized my key had unlocked the door. Curiosity mixed with fear, and against every instinct I had, I got up. I slid the key into the lock of the next room. It turned. I froze, my hand on the handle. The storm outside was relentless, hammering against the roof, but inside, the room was silent. I opened the door slowly. The room was empty, yet something was wrong. Wet footprints led from the door across the worn carpet to the bathroom. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted as though someone had left in a hurry. Towels were damp, hung over the shower rod. The room smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something metallic and wet. I stepped inside carefully. The footprints were fresh, though the storm had been constant outside. I moved to the window, looking down at the lot. No cars, not a single one. The storm had not let up. Whoever had been here had come from the hallway, or perhaps the forest. My stomach turned. I tried the next room down the hall, my pulse hammering in my ears. The key slid in. I turned it. Click.
I opened the door. Again, wet footprints, unmade beds, the same faint metallic smell. The window faced the parking lot. Empty. I didn't want to continue, but my body moved on its own, drawing me further down the hall. Each room I unlocked was the same. Signs of recent presence, but no one in sight. Some rooms were larger, some smaller, but all had the same story. Damp, cold, abandoned, but just recently occupied. My mind raced. Who could have been here? Where had they gone? I tried to convince myself it was the previous night's storm, guests running off in panic. But there hadn't been a single car outside. And how had the rooms all been accessed without anyone using the main office or leaving the parking lot? The hallway stretched on, unbroken, a dim line of flickering light and wet carpet. My hand shook as I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the storm had washed people through the building before I arrived. Perhaps I was seeing things, exhausted and paranoid. But the wet footprints told a different story. Each one distinct, different sizes, some barefoot, some booted, all leading from the doors towards the hallway and back into the rooms. They didn't leave towards the exit, only deeper into the motel, as if someone or something had been slipping from room to room under cover of the storm. I stopped at one room near the end of the hall. The door felt heavier here, the key harder to turn. I braced myself and opened it. The air inside was colder, tense, carrying a musty, iron-like smell. The bed had been stripped bare, mattress sagging in the center. Wet footprints crisscrossed the floor, leading to the bathroom, into the closet, towards the window. My eyes got a shadow moving across the far wall, but when I blinked it was gone. The room felt alive somehow, like it had been waiting for me, aware of my presence, holding itself in suspense. I realized then that I didn't know what time it was. The storm outside had blurred the passage of hours. I had no way to tell if anyone else had been in the building recently, or if these prints had been left over the course of nights and storms past. The motel was ancient, its walls soaked with water and secrets. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes, sounded like a presence watching, moving just beyond my perception. I tried to retrace my steps, moving back towards my own room, but the key in my pocket didn't fit the door. It wouldn't turn. The handle felt stiff. Panic started to rise. Had the room shifted while I was inside? Was I imagining the hallway altogether? The storm outside was relentless, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, each flickering sharpening my sense of unease. I tried the other rooms again, but now none would open. The doors were locked, solid. The hallway seemed longer, darker. The footprints remained inside each room I had opened before, as though frozen in time, never leaving, never returning. I backed against the wall, trying to make sense of what I had experienced. The storm continued outside, the rain hammering the asphalt and tin roof, but the motel was quiet now. No doors opening, no footsteps, no movement. Only the oppressive silence of the hallway, the damp smell, and the memory of the rooms I had unlocked. Rooms that seemed to exist in another dimension of reality, present and empty all at once. I felt a cold sweat break across my skin, my pulse racing in my ears. The key in my pocket seemed heavier than it had before, as if it carried the weight of what I had seen. I couldn't bring myself to put it back in the lock. I didn't want to know if it would work again. By dawn, the storm had faded to a drizzle, and pale light filtered through the motel's grimy windows. I slipped the key into my own room, and the door finally opened. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. The bed made, the carpet dry, the faint smell of mildew lingering in the corners. I didn't linger. I grabbed my bag, left the key on the nightstand, and fled the building without looking back. I never understood what I had seen. Months later, I sometimes think about the wet footprints, the unmade beds, the way each room had been recently occupied yet entirely empty. I think about the key, and how it seemed to open more than just doors. Sometimes late at night, I dream of that hallway stretching on forever, lights flickering, wet carpet under my feet, the storm still raging outside, and the sense that someone, or something, was watching from every room, waiting, patient, and unseen. The motel doesn't appear on any map. I've searched, called, asked people in towns nearby. They say it doesn't exist, hasn't in decades. But the key still sits on my dresser,
cold and heavy in my pocket when I pick it up, reminding me that some doors, once opened, are never truly closed.